So Archie, thank you so much for having us at your restaurant.
Of course.
So I know that you love gaming.
Yes.
And you and I tend to play games once in a while. I'll come up and bring a stack of games and say, hey, let's try and play some of these. Tell me what you think of these. Tell me, how did you get started?
Dungeons and Dragons, probably. 1981 or 82. I had a friend, his name was Dave Rude. Shout out, Dave. And we used to sit around and play Dungeons and Dragons. And I got hooked, like really hooked. Like Dave left and moved to Indiana, and I would pay to fly him out here so that we could play.
Oh my gosh.
I was so addicted. And then eventually became a dungeon master. And I had crates filled, like I had built an entire world, and every NPC, non-player character, and every family, and every story, and every background, and who was married to who. Like I had cases of it. It was just like the entire world, realms and realms.
Tell me, that's an unusual thing to do. Most people don't focus that much on the non-player characters. Why did you choose that?
I think it gave reality. It gave reality. My players could go into a specific bar, and the second or third time they knew who was going to be in the bar.
Oh wow!
They knew who the barkeep was, and they knew who the waitresses. They knew all the people and all the nuances. It didn't work to have them change. Besides that, it created in the game that the game was home.
So did you? Let's just throw something out strange, but let's suppose that someone wanted to start interacting with what is considered an NPC. Did you ever develop, now we're going to go in this direction instead?
Do you mean, did it change the story? Of course it did. Because it's a living, breathing thing. Now, as the Dungeon Master, I played all the NPCs, right? So that was the other part of it, was like, if they went into a specific town, I had all of the documents for that town. As they were moving around, part of my job was to know who was it they were going to be, relating to. So, but of course it would. Like if I knew the journey they were already on, because I've been the narrator, the dungeon master up until this point, that was what you used NPCs for, was to sculpt the interactions.
Kind of like flesh it out and make it real for everyone.
Yes.
One thing that I think is fascinating is if they have this backstory, then they can start even playing off of that.
Right.
And just completely shift the game. It's like, you had to be on your feet as a dungeon master. Oh, it looks like we're going this direction then.
Yeah, you could actually set something up and think we're headed this way, and suddenly the character just goes a different direction. So you have to always be like in the game. You can't just think that you're over here just narrating. You've got to get that they get to control. I mean, there are different variations of Dungeons and Dragons where there's a set rule and a set pattern and a set floor. I didn't really play that way. I played real open world, which means you get to choose where you're going and what you're doing.
Oh, wow.
And in my particular case, it was my job to enroll you, a word that you and I are, in going where I wanted you to go. But it didn't always work.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, usually in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, especially in the 80s when it first started out, you really had a knights and dragons and elves and dwarves kind of realm that was created. Did you ever take it in a different direction?
No, to be honest. I mean, we had vampires and werewolves. I guess that would count, but it was never really need to go outside of the realm. Though I will tell you, Gary Gygax, he did create the Oriental Adventures. That was his different direction. And as a matter of fact, my company is called Woojin Enterprises, which is his version of an Oriental wizard. So the name of my company that owns our restaurants and everything else is The Business of a Wizard.
Oh, wow. So a nod back to that.
Yeah, back to Gary Gygax, who I actually had the privilege of not only talking to a couple of times, but we had lunch one day.
Wow. So, and for our watchers, our viewers who don't know who Gary Gygax is, can you kind of explain?
He's the creator of Dungeons and Dragons and several others. Like later, he lost control of TSR, and then he went and created other gaming engines, but he's basically the guy who came up with the idea of Dungeons and Dragons.
How did you meet him?
The friend that I talked, I was so engrossed that I went looking for a specific manual that couldn't be found for Dungeons and Dragons because became a collector of old Dungeons and Dragons material. And in that process, someone introduced me by phone. I had a couple of conversations with him on the phone about finding this particular resource material. And he came to Orange County to make an appearance. And he called and said, "I'm going to be there. You want to catch lunch?" And so we did.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I mean, it was a one-time thing. I wouldn't say we were friends, but at that point, he was a hero.
What year was that?
Oh, I don't know years. You know, all the years when you're my age start to blend together. I wouldn't know. Probably around 86, somewhere in that neighborhood, I think.
So we're still in the height of the Dungeons and Dragons kind of movement.
Yeah.
People started getting into it.
Yeah, but even then, there were materials which were not readily available.
Mm-hmm. So how did people acquire them?
Well, they were published, but there were still... It's like a fever, you know, and you get addicted. It's like you begin collecting not just the characters and the miniatures and the boards, and there was like materials. There was even Dragon Magazine, which I don't even know if it's still around. And so you would just hunt for, like, what is it that you could get that not everyone would have?
It sounds like a fascinating world to get involved in and time-consuming, but a labor of love.
Yeah. There's nothing like getting around, getting a bunch of friends around the table and going on an adventure together.
Wow.
And the way I was trained, which I'm not saying is the way most Dungeons and Dragon people do it or most games are run, we rarely rolled dice. It wasn't about the dice, it was about the story more than anything else. Literally, we would go on an adventure every time. It was extraordinary.
Wow.
And to this day, I still have a hand-bound leather book with my primary character and all his stuff in it, and his adventures were handwritten into this book. Because even though I've thrown away most of my Dungeons and Dragons stuff because nobody would play, that book still remains in my library.
We are going to have to play. Maybe we'll do some sort of a live feed or something. We're going to do something with that. So let's fast forward a little bit further. Tell me about the parties, the LAN parties.
In the old days when we played computer games, it was you would type in "look left" and the computer would go and you see a tree. Look right, you see a building. And they created Mystery House, which was basically a stick drawing, but it represented something.
So before you go there, I just want to make sure that this is clear for people who have been playing that long. It's not like the camera could look that way. Sometimes it's just text that you're following line after line after line about what is actually
There were
happening.
no graphics.
Right.
There's no camera.
It's text-based.
Zork was one of those games.
That's a great example.
But Ken and Roberta, who had done some other programming before, they had done word processing stuff, they created Mystery House, which was basically stick figures. It was the first time we had stick figures to look at.
So now there's something to see. It's not just all imagination.
And I'm going to do my version. I'm going to own that this may not be true history, but it is how I remember it and how it played out. But Apple came out with the Apple II GS, which was a color graphics, and started taking market. As I remember it, IBM created the PC Junior, which they used Charlie Chaplin as their thing. And that was going to be their competitive. And they needed something to compete in the market. So they came to the Williamses and said, "We want you to create us a graphical game." And IBM paid for the engine that made that possible. At the time, it was like $600,000 or $800,000, but that was a long time ago.
That's
so that's
nothing.
a lot of money now.
Yeah.
But that's how King's Quest was created, and so King's Quest 1 through whatever. I mean, literally, we had, I think, 9 episodes of King's Quest. And then Space Quest and Heroes Quest and Leisure Suit Larry.
Oh, I love Leisure Suit Larry.
Like, nothing like playing a game where your object is to get the person laid, right?
And the character just looks so cheesy.
Right, but that was part of the fun.
That's the fun, exactly. It was a whole world that you could really understand who that person was.
Well, and for me, all of them were. And then, of course, you had the Colonel's Bequest, and you had Dragon Quest, and you had Police Quest, and for your viewers, yes, I played them all. Um, I forgot the one with the Sins of the Father, which was I can't remember the rest of that game. That was one of the best. Phantasmagoria. But one of the other things that they did, because he was such a visionary, he actually started distributing games for other companies and building games for other companies. As I remember it, there was a big lawsuit about him and Sierra Online, which I think at that time it wasn't called Sierra Online, I think it was just called Sierra Games or whatever, created Frogger for consoles and sold it, and there was a bunch of stuff. But also in the distribution, they actually at one point operated the distribution for a company called Valve. I'm looking at the camera. If you don't know who Valve is and you don't know what Steam is, you're not playing. Because that's the big boys in the game now as far as distribution and stuff. And Sierra had the distribution rights for Counter-Strike and all these major games. I'll never forget when we went down into the Black Mesa for the first time, and that was a game that we all played in those days. And there's a history behind all of that we don't need to, but the CDC, UC, I can't remember. But before the company got sold off, one of the things Ken came up with that was rather brilliant was an online community for entertainment.
Tell me more about that.
So it was called originally the Sierra Network. And I happened to be lucky enough that I was a part of the beta program, actually the end of the alpha, beginning of the beta. His envisionment it's actually really inspiring to me. I apologize I'm just having a moment of proclaim. There are lots of people who are in hospitals, who are in nursing homes, who are shut-ins, and he wanted to create a way for them to play games together.
Not just play games, but together.
Correct, which was like unheard of at that moment in time. One of the other couple of things that people don't know about him is that they actually had the right to Hoyle cards, and he also created the Avatar. So, really? Imagination was the first game where you actually created a cartoon character representation of you, and you played games. It was extraordinary, and before its time. And that was its downfall. So,
why do you say that?
Well, as I remember this story, Ken had been on Prodigy and thought Prodigy was the bomb. For those of you who don't know Prodigy, it was awesome. Then it went the way of America Online. But he wanted to
They're probably asking, what's America Online?
Yeah, you've got mail. But his idea was to build a gaming community, just like that. But we were all still on dial-up, which is something the new generation has no idea what that is. But literally, it used your phone line. It meant you couldn't talk on the phone and people couldn't call in. And it was extremely expensive.
And slow.
That was one of the things that made Imagination so perfect, is that he had figured out how to... He was sending the very smallest amount of data, and so it never felt like it was slow or encumbered. Back then, we were mostly used to bulletin boards and stuff, and in this case, we had, I'm trying to remember, we had Larry Land, we had Eusebius, we had all kinds of board games, from checkers, chess, and all of those stuff. We had a game called Boogers, don't ask. We had a thing because they did Red Baron, which was a flight simulator, but it was with the old Red Barons and stuff, and it actually played online. But the problem is that for $15 or $9 or $15, you got like 3 hours a month. That was all that we could afford to do it, and that's not enough to play a game.
Right.
So people were charging up these huge amounts, or they were quitting. They were like shutting it off so that they didn't get stuck. And so ultimately, after about 3 years, by the way, I want to make a note. 1990, Imagination was already a year into development, was in beta, and it launched somewhere around April or May of 91. It was the first gaming platform, massive gaming platform available. Now, there's some people who argue. They would say that it was Ultima Online or 369. There was another one. But if you actually go look at release dates and stuff, Sierra actually hit before they did. And but anyway, he sold it to AT&T, and they changed it to Imagination, and that lasted a little while. There was an upgrade in video and some stuff, and then they sold it to America Online, who ultimately disbanded it.
Interesting.
But during the time, right after we finished, because we had spent like 8 or 9 months in beta, I realized I wanted to meet the people in person. So I held a gathering, we just called it a gathering, at the Disneyland Hotel.
At the time, there was only one hotel.
At the Disneyland Hotel with the swimming pool with the gamer in the middle of the pool, underneath the pool. And we got together, and I think 23 or 24 of us got together. One person from Course Gold, which is Sierra, came. It was somebody from the Euservius team. I wish I could remember her name. And we all signed in.
Wow.
And it was the first meeting of an online multi-level online entertainment platform gathering in person.
How many people were there?
Well, I don't know how many was on the service, but there was only like 23 or 24 of us. It was a small group.
Yeah, 23 or 24 people met in person to play online.
We didn't play. We had been playing together for over a year and never, you could send messages, but we hadn't seen each other or met.
Yeah.
And so we literally showed up and met and had lunch and talked talked about our games and what we like to do.
So you got to meet each other in person.
We got to meet in person. Because we used to tell this joke, because when Sierra was doing the rollout, we were just going public, they got the kids from Home Improvement to come on.
Oh my gosh.
Except you never knew that it was the kids from Home Improvement for sure. Like it would say Zachary Ty Bryan, who, yes, we know he's currently in trouble, but Zachary Ty Bryan, and then the little character looked like, but it could have been anybody because it was a cartoon. So we thought we should meet in person, so we actually got to know each other face to face.
Wow.
So I actually hold the distinction of having the very first online gaming platform gathering anywhere in the world, which is kind of cool.
That's amazing.
Like nobody knew. And then I kept, up until when I moved to this house, I kept the sign-up sheet, keep thinking somebody will want it someday. And then nobody ever wanted it. So I remember like making a decision and throwing the whole notebook away.
Oh my gosh. Is that the one and only time you all met?
Yes.
Gosh.
Yeah, because shortly after that, the sales started happening. What really happened was UCU or something, Universal Credit, whatever. I don't know if you remember, like if you had a credit card, you got special deals and discounts and kind of stuff started happening. There was that big thing. And they convinced Ken that they were going to be the next billion-dollar company. So he sold the company. And then they brought the first online store that you could go shopping in his store. And it just kind of ended.
Gotcha. One thing I remember, you sent me a link to a website, or it was the game where it showed the different lands that you could enter. Can you talk about that?
So what would happen is you would log in, and the first screen you would see is like, there were a couple of versions, but mostly a satellite, and it would have a little house, and it would beam you to the satellite, and then it would beam you, and then you would go in, and you were like in a community. So the center of the community was a clubhouse, and at the clubhouse you could play basic card games, chess, like simple games. Post office was off to the left.
What was there? What was that?
You got your mail. That's where you picked up your mail. Later, the store was also there. The UC whatever was also there.
So you would pick your messages up at the post office.
You could, yes.
And then if we're at the store part, you could pick up things for the game, or
you could buy. No. You would buy product. You would buy real products. It was like e-commerce at the beginning.
Wow.
And then, things progressed. We had like the children's play area, which was boogers and some other stuff. And then we had Euservius Mountain. There were 2 games there. They were kind of Dungeons and Dragons, but with very limited graphics. But they were tricky. Like, we all spent lots of time playing. And then we got LAN, which was our casino.
Oh my God.
So we had casinos, LAN. but you would click on the different buildings, and that was the thing. The other thing that was really cool about them is that the community was seasonally generated.
What does that mean?
So depending on when you logged in, it would always be the same buildings. But if you logged in and it was winter, there would be in the little lake there would be ice skaters and there would be snowbanks and it would be snowing. Or if you logged in and it was fall, there would be leaves falling from the trees and swans in the lake instead. Like it showed the seasons when you logged in.
Wow, what a difference from where you all started, where everything was text-based, to coming into something where it would reflect current conditions. It was changing.
Yeah, it was growing. And we were really sad because at the end we were told that when it disappeared that it would be coming back, but it would be coming back as ultra modern. And it never came back. So we were expecting it to come back and we were going to have skyscrapers and all kinds of stuff in a city that you walk around, but it just didn't come to fruition.
Wow. All right. So let's fast forward from there. Then what? What happened with gaming for you?
In a lot of ways, gaming stopped. I mean, I still play. I don't know if I should tell. I played World of Warcraft, and it was okay. It's still okay.
Why is it okay for you?
I actually don't feel as submerged in it as I did even in Imagination. It was more submersive. And it's not Dungeons and Dragons, which is extremely submersive. You and I play games and it's move the thing around the board, but it's not, and it's fun, but it's not as submersive.
It's not taking you and your imagination, if you will, to a whole other realm.
Right, not an experience. There was a game, not a CR game, which was called Fear. Mm-hmm. And it scared the crap out of you. It was immersive. Warcraft was never immersive to me. It was fun. The risk of being sued, it was kind of like a time waster. Like,
it just wasn't for you.
Well, no, I mean, I played it. I really pushed it. Mm-hmm. And since we've owned the restaurant, I've had the opportunity to cater for Blizzard several times, and they usually give me free, like, here, go get the newest updates and stuff, and I try, but lately, the last couple of years, I've been playing Elder Scrolls Online. Mm-hmm. I love Skyrim. I think Skyrim's one of the best computer games that's been out in a really, really long time.
Mm-hmm. So, anything else you want to share with us?
Camera. One of the great things about playing games like Dungeons and Dragons is that you get stops. Like there are things you can't, like you can't kill the dragon. You can't do the journey. But if you play the game and you keep playing the game, you figure out how to kill the dragon or go on with the journey. And if you take that and overlay it with your life, you're going to find plenty of dragons and mountains you cannot do. And what there is that you keep playing, you take the skills that you've learned, as crazy as that is, and not have it be something that defeats you. If you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you can't. And only you get to set.